Why is it fucking making me rotate the? It keeps saying rotate the device. All right, we're live here. On this is the first time I've been live on this channel. This channel is growing a lot. I'd read these books on this channel, and I do it all in one take. And so I might as well try doing it live because it saves the VOD. It keeps saying rotate device, but we're live right here, so I'm just gonna do it like this. I don't know why it's saying rotate device. Let's try it like that. Okay, let's do it like this then. Instead of looking for us, it's gonna be like this. So we'll know that we'll do it like this. So we're gonna be reading chapter 9 here. Chapter 9 in the book Homeless College Student. You can also find it under Gonzo Education. Right now it's available for like $5 on Amazon. It's for free on Kindle. And so let's go ahead and read this. Chapter 9, the University of Texas. The fall semester was about to begin, and I would soon realize my dream of becoming a student at UT. For as long as I could remember, it was the only school I wanted to go to. I had excellent grades and some nice extracurriculars, so I knew I could have gone somewhere else with a scholarship, but I've been planning this UT thing for years. Adam said all of my classes were going to be full of rich white and Asian kids, but I didn't believe him. I thought UT was going to be like community college, except everyone would be much smarter. You're going to be the oldest kid in every class, he said. No way, there's always a few people over 25. This ain't community college, he told me. I know how this works. Everyone in all your classes are going to be younger with more money. You don't know that, I said. UT has the largest undergraduate population in the country. There'll be a few older students than me. There were plenty of non-traditional students at ACC. I was a few years older than most, but there was always at least one person older than me in every class. During my first semester at ACC, I had an instructor who asked everyone on the first day, who in here is closer to 38 years old than 20 years old? Who in here is closer to 30 years old than 20 years old? It was relieving to see half the class raise their hands. So half the class was closer to 30 than 20. I liked ACC. It had a laid-back Austin kind of vibe, but there were very few UT students who were actually from Austin. The majority were from Texas, but most were from the small towns across the vast landscape. Austin is unlike every other city in Texas, so the people might as well have been from another planet. Some of the kids were from major cities like Dallas, Houston, or San Antonio, but even if they were the kind that never left their, even if they were the kind that never left their wealthy suburbs. If they weren't from a suburb, then they came from a small town, and either way, in my head at least, they were inexperienced brats who hadn't worked or suffered like I had. Texas House Bill 588. So I guess this is going to be a little differently since nobody's watching this live right now, or I guess a couple people are, but I am going to edit one word in here. So, okay. Texas House Bill 588, also known as the Top 10% Rule, ensures that the majority of UT students at UT are from Texas. The law guarantees high school students who graduated in the top 10% of their class, no matter how small, automatic admission to all the state-funded universities. The most popular school is the University of Texas, and it's not even close. It didn't matter if you went to a highly competitive high school with thousands of students or one with a graduating class of 20. The law supposedly creates diversity, but it also guarantees that the vast majority of incoming freshmen are fresh out of high school. Over 81% of freshmen that's 18 and just graduated high school. If UT really wanted to create diversity, they should look at their student age bracket. According to their website, 95% of all UT graduates in 2008, undergraduates in 2008 were under 25 years old, and only 5% came from families that made less than $20,000 a year. The majority of students came from households that made at least $80,000 per year. So a lot of times you hear statistics and you don't really think about it. 95% of all UT students were under 25 years old. I was over 25, and I looked around and be like, whoa, everybody's like younger than me. I was like 25. I was 26 when I started at UT. And I looked around and was like, whoa, is it just me or is everybody older? And then you look up the information, yeah, 95%. And it doesn't make sense, Education and learning is something that's lifelong. You don't have to do it between the ages of 18 and 22. So I was about to start going to school with the children of the elite. Bush was president, and his daughter had recently graduated from the same degree program I was enrolled in. I should have known how different I'd feel after years of homelessness and hard labor. It was obvious in my first class on the first day. I walked in a few minutes late to a classroom, and a few of the male students laughed at my arrival. I was caught off guard, perplexed. Nobody had ever laughed at me at ACC. I don't remember ever receiving treatment like that before in my entire life. I may be a few years older than them, but I couldn't see why that'd be something to laugh at. The rest of the day didn't go much better. I was the oldest student in every class, sometimes older than the teacher. I felt like a red M&M in a jar full of greens, and I wasn't ready for people to make such a big deal out of me either. I didn't like talking in front of people back then. I'd get nervous, so I'd prefer to sit in the back and let someone else have the floor, not using every crowd as an opportunity to boost my ego. UT wasn't what I thought it'd be, and I was reminded of closed conversations of a particular kind of disrespect which I had not seen or thought about since high school. I learned a lot about myself that week, most notably how hard I'd become with all the different jobs, experience, and heartaches I had behind me. When my financial aid check finally came, I rented a room in West Campus. I always wanted to live in that neighborhood, and I'd been hanging out in the area since my first summer in Austin almost 10 years earlier. I'd been to parties there, and I worked at one of the dormitories. But now that I was an official UT student, I thought it'd be a good idea to live in the UT's infamous party neighborhood. For years, I pictured myself romantically living in West Campus, but when it finally happened, it wasn't anything like I expected. I moved in with two roommates who I found on Craigslist posts that said, "Party Girls, 420 friendly." Their post caught my attention, but when I got there, I was disappointed to find that neither of them liked me very much. The proximity to campus was good, but the bedroom I was paying for was actually a dining room, the only entrance to their filthy kitchen. The day I moved in, one of the girls started asking about my parents. I told her I didn't have any, and she said, "Oh, are you an orphan?" She's like, "Oh, are you an orphan? I knew an orphan during my sophomore year, and she was surprisingly normal." No, I'm not an orphan," I said. "I'm like 30. "What? You're 30? She shrieked. "Well, I'm 26, almost 27, I said, calming her down. "Oh, okay, that's a relief," she said. "Don't fret. I knew a girl freshman year, and her boyfriend was like 28 or something." Ah. My two roommates would have their rich friends over day and night, despite some of them still being in high school. I was too old and poor for any of them to give me a chance. At least that's what I told myself. The West Campus party scene isn't a good place to stand out. I didn't fit in, but I didn't really want to either. These kids acted as if they were on a reality show, but in reality, they were just spending their parents' money on experiences they couldn't have had otherwise. I regret not having a better attitude. I didn't give many kids a chance, so how could I have expected them to give me one? I should have tried to make the best out of a situation, but I didn't even try to see the good in anyone at the whole house. It was always me against them. A couple of guys were okay, one of them I can think of. He always tried to get me to go to some of the parties in the neighborhood, but I never actually went. The only friend I made in the whole house was one of my roommate's younger brothers. He was younger than they were, but for whatever psychological reason, he was the only one I could relate to. They called him Shorty, and he had dropped out of high school just like I had. University students are obsessed with having the college experience. I remember hearing one of my roommate's friends bragging about how she maxed out her parents' credit card on cocaine. Another guy made fun of my shoes and the fact that I hadn't seen the film Anchorman. I could understand getting upset because someone hadn't seen Pulp Fiction, but Anchorman? Seriously? Their parents paid their bills, and they had no idea what the term self-made even meant. The money I gave my roommates for rent never saw the landlord. They spent it on new clothes they bought in woman boutiques that had recently opened up on the drag. The landlord was the landlord of the place. The landlord was a royal scumball who dropped out of UT 20 years earlier. He was about 40 years old and lived off his parents' money in a house his father owned. The guy lived in the basement and rented the main part of the house to hot co-eds he tried to have sex with for discounts on rent. One day he wanted to fight me for no particular reason besides the fact that he was drunk and didn't like me. The second I moved in, I had an unwelcoming feeling that I was unfamiliar with. Every job I'd ever had, every new group I'd ever got involved with, and every person I'd ever lived with has always considered me exceptionally cool. Not just like, "Oh, Greg, yeah, he's cool, he's okay," but more like, "Greg, you are the coolest person I've ever met." So I didn't get why all of a sudden I was in a circle where I wasn't accepted. I don't give up easily, but after my first week at UT, I was actually thinking about quitting. For years, I wondered what went on in those architecturally stunning buildings on the 40 acres, but now that I was there, the only thing I could think of was going back to where I came from. I finally regained my composure at the end of my second week. I had a class that was canceled and used the unexpected free time to walk down to Shoal Creek. I hadn't been there in a while, and I went to the same spot Michael and I had camped at years earlier when we walked to Austin. Everything was covered with debris, but I was still able to excavate a few old soda cans and candy wrappers. I dug a little more and found the blanket we fought the winter off with. It was covered with mold, but I looked it over and reminded myself it was still there. Things got easier after I started to spend an hour every day at Shoal Creek. I made a little chill spot off the trail, up a cliff, and behind a layer of trees and bamboo. This was my personal smoking spot for the remainder of the time I was in Austin and a student at Texas. I'd sit there, close my eyes, and listen to the sounds of nature, passing cars, and myself breathing. The only way I was gonna make it through UT was with medication and strong marijuana. I could be alone, gather my thoughts, and remind myself that college isn't everything. There's much more in life than the experiences you have at a university. I actually enjoyed going to the very large classes, which they called cattle calls. I got to sit at the back and keep to myself, pretending I was at a movie or paid for an expensive presentation of whatever it was the professor was talking about. It was the small classes that had 20 people or less in it that I hated. Everyone thought, just because of how I looked, that I was there for entertainment. It felt like they expected me to get up in front of the class and start doing a stand-up. Looking back, it seems silly because much of it was in my own head, coming from an irrational fear of public speaking. Every small class I was in, I told myself over and over, you can leave at any time, nobody is forcing you to be here. And sometimes that's exactly what I do. If I didn't get along with a professor, or maybe a couple frat boys kept trying to trip me when I walked by, or if sometimes I just didn't feel like coming back, I'd take my chances, hope the teacher didn't fail me, and take the easy way out. The first class I abruptly stopped attending was during my first semester, a science lab with about 30 people. The room could have doubled as a Hollywood set for High School Musical. Students worked closely with each other at lab tables, and everyone was supposed to have a lab partner. But no one ever sat by me, so I always had to be added to third to another group. Gotta find a partner for the guy in the back. Again, the professor said. He'd usually put me with two former high school football players who had recently arrived at UT and loved it. One of them claimed he was the king of high school. The other one told me how much he loved going to college because it was like high school on steroids. Apparently, I considered higher education as something a bit more dignified. I'd seen enough of the world to know that this wasn't normal behavior. I wasn't going to pretend I was in high school. On the first class day, the instructor, who was a few years younger than I was, said he was a cool professor and wasn't going to fail anyone. I did my best to relate to my peers and spark conversation, but after a few weeks I gave up, took the professor on his word, and never went back. It was the first time I ever got a D. I didn't think I had anything in common with these people. The high price of tuition makes sure everyone's in the same age group and from the same economic background. There's not enough federal financial aid to cover tuition, books, and living expenses at any major university unless you're over 25, military, or a ward of the court. And once again, according to the university's website, only 5% of students in 2006 were over the age of 25. You don't get that much. 95% are under the age of 25. I could see that number being like under the age of 30, but 25, dude, that's as young as you can almost get, you know? There were things I just couldn't understand about my peers. I heard people say they put themselves through college, but just because you made an insurance payment on the SUV your parents bought you, or you paid a few phone bills, does not qualify for you to use that term. The fact is there are very few self-made people left in this world, but plenty of people who claim to be. Most of the self-made people in the United States, they're usually first generation. They're usually either black, Mexican, or first generation Filipino, Korean, Eastern European. Usually you hardly ever see Caucasian. There were things I just couldn't understand about my peers. I had never been around so many straight men interested in what type of shoes I had on. I hadn't had anyone ask me what my parents did for a living since I was 10, and I don't remember ever seeing an adult female that wasn't a porn star with a huge pink bow in her hair. My whole time at UT, I get dozens of letters addressed to the parents of Gregory Brandt. After everything I've been through, it was insulting. I didn't mention anything about any parents and never received any of these kind of letters the whole time I was at ACC. In retrospect, I let a negative mindset take over and made myself out to be the victim. I distinctly remember walking around campus, shit-kicking the ground with an angry look on my face. I only saw the differences and didn't bother to see if I actually liked anyone. UT was nothing like I thought, so I let pity take over until it killed me. I even stopped talking to drag rats. I wouldn't look in their direction and became one of those jerks who ignored their request for change. I'd act like they didn't exist. I became someone who I didn't recognize. By the end of the first month, I stopped attending 2 of my classes because of nerves and mistreatment by other students. It took a lot out of me. I was beat. It wasn't all in my head either. There were a few times the professor actually asked for eyes and attention away from me and back on his lecture because of the fully grown jerks who'd menacingly stare at me for the whole class, giving me a look like, "What are you doing here?" You know, that's what the frat boys were like. They were, "What's this guy doing here, all tall and smart in college? What's he doing?" My 2 roommates and their stupid little friends were the epitome of what I didn't like about UT. By the time my 27th birthday came, I knew I had to get out of there. The girls' parents were asking for a security deposit, I was behind on rent, and I loathed my roommates and scummy landlord. If I was going to go to UT, I knew I couldn't bring the entire bullshit home with me. I wasn't going to act like these were the best years of my life, because they obviously weren't. Toward the end of my West Campus stay, my roommates tried to diversify the group of rich kids by bringing home street people. In particular, a Charles Manson wannabe they found on the drag. He'd recently been released from prison, not jail, for a violent felony. The cross-eyed lunatic wanted to start a cult and attack rich white bankers. I guess he didn't understand that rich white bankers the Looney Tune was talking about were basically these kids' parents. He tried to hypnotize everyone and take control of the house with his cult bullshit. I'd seen the scam before, so none of it rubbed off on me, but the naive college kids took one hit of acid and were like putty in his hands. I'd usually spend my weekends at Adam's housing projects, getting some air and totally forgetting about my painful college life at UT. One Monday morning, I got back to West Campus House and saw that the Charles Manson wannabe, had moved all my stuff out of my room and into the yard. He took over my room and thought I'd want to fight for him. But I took the high road, I grabbed what I wanted and never saw him again. I went back to Adam's housing projects and told him what happened. Adam said I could sleep on his couch as long as I let him use my car to deliver newspapers. Michael had apparently given him the idea it was a swell job. "You want to do what?" I asked. "Newspapers," he said in his New York accent. "I want to throw papers." "It's the hardest job, dude. You don't get a day off and you can barely drive yourself." "Hey, they gave me a license," he yelled. The Texas Department of Public Safety had recently given Adam a driver's license, but I taught the New Yorker how to drive and knew that he drove terrible. He didn't have a car, but he wanted to use mine to make money and gave me an ultimatum. "If you want to stay here, you gotta let me use your car to throw papers." I figured this was probably going to get in the way of my early morning classes and pile up homework, but I didn't have an option. I refused to live in my car while I was going to UT. My first night there, Adam had already set up the gig. The manager of the circulation department said he could use my car, but I had to be there delivering with him every night. At 2 a.m. sharp, we drove to the newspaper warehouse. I'd seen it before, during my previous stints as a carrier, but I'd never been so tired. My first semester at UT was one of the hardest things I ever did, and waking up in the middle of the night to throw papers with Adam made me feel like I had Down syndrome. Me, Adam, and the guy training us bagged a few hundred papers before filling my back seat to the windows. Adam was to drive while the trainer sat shotgun and gave directions. I lay in the back on top of the hundreds of bagged papers with my head touching the ceiling. My job was to hand Adam papers while the trainer shouted out house numbers. Adam was asked to drive, keep his eyes on the road, and toss the correct newspaper, all at the same time. He was bound to fail, and I should have said something and ended the whole shebang when I noticed he could barely get the car out of the warehouse parking lot. They gave Adam a ghetto route with hardly any customers. We didn't even last an hour. The trainer shouted a number and Adam tossed the paper at the wrong house. Then the trainer told Adam to put the car in reverse and fix the mistake. But Adam didn't understand that you gotta wait for the car to stop before you switch it from the D to the R. He switched gears going about 20 miles per hour and you heard the transmission make the horrible crunking sound. The trainer got out, looked under the car and laughed. "We're not going anywhere," he said. "Your tranny's screwed." I knew it cost more to fix the transmission than the car was worth. Adam didn't even apologize and blamed my Mazda for costing him the job. Someone came to pick up the guy training us, and Adam and I walked back to the public housing project. He didn't say anything when we got back. I thought maybe he felt guilty about breaking my car, but then he tossed down a few drinks and started shouting like a New Yorker in rush hour. "I was going to let you stay here if you let me use your car," he said, "and now that you have a car, I don't want you to stay." My heart raced. I jumped up and got an inch from his face. "After everything I've done for you," I said, looking at him coldly. He didn't repeat himself, and we just stared each other down for a few seconds before I walked away. Fighting wouldn't have solved anything. I left his apartment an hour later and got on a bus to school. After school, I called Michael and told him what happened. We hadn't been talking much since I stopped delivering the paper with him, but he didn't like Adam, so I found us a common enemy. He lent me some cash and I had the car towed to Adam's projects, but Adam came outside and said I couldn't park it there, so I spent the next 3 hours pushing it through his projects and out onto the ghetto main street. It was the scariest street in town and the last place you'd ever want to sleep in a broken down car. If my car worked, I could at least use it as a weapon. The pavement was covered with broken glass from all the nightly break-ins. As soon as the sun went down, you'd hear gunshots, glass shatterings, and cries for help off in the distance. After I got my car parked, it was only early afternoon, so I locked it up and took a bus back to campus. I went to the Fine Arts Library for the first time. Despite all the chaos going on in my life, I felt so much better the second I got to the library. I had never had access to so many books in such a pleasant setting. The season's first cold front arrived that afternoon, so I was happy to found a safe place indoors. I walked around the library, clearing my head and noticing practical things that would help out my situation, like top-of-the-line computers, access to cheap printing, and plenty of room to linger about. I even found a secluded corner to curl up in and take a nap. When the library closed, I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do, where I was going to sleep, so I walked up and down the drag looking at where my favorite hangout spots used to be. The Barnes & Nobles was no longer open, there was a sushi restaurant and sound exchange old building, and Einstein's and La Fun Arcade had shut their doors and sold their video game machines. My favorite coffee shop, Quack's Coffee, was now a high-end woman's boutique with scantily clad mannequins glaring down at me. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped, so I walked to Dobie Mall and sat outside the movie theater looking out the second-story window. There was no one outside. Everyone had heard about the cold front coming, and even the drag rats found a hole to crawl inside. I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to stop going to UT just because I was homeless, but I had a full day of classes the next day and nowhere to sleep. I sat in Dobie Mall and tried to calm my nerves. I could either go to Shoal Creek, crawl under some limestone rocks and shiver the night away, or I could take the bus to my car parked in the ghetto. My car would be warmer, but it was parked in front of the most dangerous set of government housing projects I had ever seen. I got on the bus and headed to my car. My stop was the last stop, and the only other person still on the bus when I got off was an elderly black lady. Seeing her made me feel better. I got off the bus after midnight and made my way through the gang-infested neighborhoods, over shards of broken glass and fresh puddles of blood, until I finally found my tiny car. I lived in a broken-down car in front of Mom's house years earlier, and at the time I didn't think it could get any worse, but it can always get worse. I got in the back seat, rolled up the windows, locked the doors, and slept like a rock. When I got up the next morning, 3 young black dudes were knocking on my window and yelling at me to wake up. They wanted to know why I was sleeping on their street. I made up some story about getting kicked out and having to spend the night outside, and one of them interrupted my story and impolitely asked for my wallet. I refused to give it to him. I told him I didn't have any money and even showed him the inside. If they wanted my ID and social security card, they were going to have to take it from me. I raised my voice to let them know I wasn't backing down, and they decided I wasn't worth it and sauntered away. While I was taking off in the other direction, heading to school, I saw a red-tailed hawk fly by me with a pigeon clinched in talons. Great neighborhood. I was very hungry, and the last place you want to go on an empty stomach is a college campus. So instead, I walked to the closest social services office and applied for food stamps. I'd been putting it off for the main reason that I didn't want to admit to anyone that I went to UT, but still wasn't smart enough to find food. While I was walking to the EBT office, I pretended I wasn't a UT student and that I didn't have that kind of pressure. I walked by the neighborhood I used to live in with Dick before I even set foot in college. I imagined myself the same carefree person I was back then. By the time I got to the food stamp office, I laughed about my situation. I reminded myself that out of the 50,000 students at UT, it's the largest school in the United States, the largest university, I'm pretty sure I was the only one waking up in the back seat of a broken down Mazda Protege, dusting off my shoulders and walking 3 miles just so I could apply for food stamps and not starve. The food stamp office wasn't busy. They saw me right away and every employee was surprisingly helpful. Totally different than the last time I applied. They heard my story, qualified me in an hour, and gave me a Texas Lone Star card that had almost $200 worth of food money on it. I immediately went to a gas station and filled up on junk food. I went to all my classes the next day with pockets full of snacks and candy. On the way back, I stopped by a grocery store and stocked up on some non-perishables for the back seat of my car. Things at UT weren't going how I pictured they would, but at least I wasn't going to starve. I woke up early the next morning, had a big breakfast, and set off to school with a better attitude. On my way to the bus stop, I was stopped by a local TV news crew doing a story about the plague of robberies and murders that had swept across that particular neighborhood. They asked if I was a college student and if I lived in the area. I told them I went to UT and that there was a lot of crime in the neighborhood. I didn't tell them I was homeless and sleeping in a broken down car a couple blocks away. I should have. It would have been the story of the year. Having money for food put me in a better mood. It was one less thing to worry about. I spent that evening in the Fine Arts Library watching movies and listening to Mozart records. For the next few weeks, I stuck with the same routine. I go to most of my classes during the day, with intermediate smoking sessions at Shoal Creek, and hang out in the Fine Arts Library until closing. At the end of the day, I take the city bus across town to my busted down car, parked in the projects, crawl in the tiny back seat, and try to get some sleep. I focus on what I had: free bus fare, plenty of food, and all the resources I could check out at UT libraries: books, DVDs, CDs, records, and even tape recorders and video cameras. I still had to continue to going to my annoying classes, but other than that, I felt things were slowly getting better. I reminded myself that I could easily be in the same position, homeless, and not be enrolled in one of the country's top universities, the University of Texas. I only went to my car at dark, so I was forced to spend more time walking around campus in the drag, especially on weekends. One Saturday, I ran into an old friend named Chris. Chris was from the backwoods hillbilly area of East Texas, and even though he'd been in Austin a few years, he looked like he just stepped out of forest back home. He had long, straggly hair that he never washed or combed, dirty blue jeans, which he also never washed, and he was always unshaven. Chris was a great storyteller, especially if you got him talking about growing up in the East Texas wilderness. He'd go off about living on the land, picking berries, hunting rabbit, and eating squirrel with his father. He had a deep East Texas accent and was very open and friendly. He didn't come off as intelligent, but after you got to know him, you realized he was a lot smarter than he let you believe. Chris originally moved to Austin to win back his girlfriend, Summer. She got into UT with a scholarship and broke up with him days before she left their small Texas town. Chris couldn't take it, and just like any good man, he hitchhiked to Austin and lived on the streets near campus with drag rats until she gave in and they got an apartment. When Chris saw me that day, he looked me up and down, which wasn't typical of him, and invited me to take a shower, also not typical. I hung out at his apartment with him and his girlfriend, smoked their weed, and watched college football, even though they hated football. I didn't think that they had had company in a while, so I was glad to keep them entertained. I talked about how I'd been sleeping in the backseat of a car in front of Adams government housing projects while going to school at UT full time. "It's gonna get down to freezing tonight," Summer told me. "You can sleep on our couch. It's not much, but it's warmer, there's more space, and you have a less chance of getting stabbed, Tommy." For some reason they called me Tommy. The next morning, Chris and Summer said I could crash on their couch indefinitely. Kindness like that is rare, and I was grateful to finally have somewhere to chill at the end of the day. Their place was in Hyde Park, which has more young professionals and artist types not associated with UT. It's nothing like the freshman-filled, fraternity-packed trash dump known as West Campus. I had more time after I moved in with Chris and Summer. When you're homeless, your days are filled with making sure you're clean, warm, and don't smell too bad. That's if you already took care of the main human priority, an empty stomach. I was homeless and going to UT, so I had to stay clean while at the same time keep up with the classes, do my homework, and deal with schoolyard bullshit. After 2 weeks on their couch, I got a job at a computer tech center in Dobie Mall. I'm nostalgic and have a history with Dobie. It was the first place Michael and I went to when we initially came to Austin for our sister's graduation. 5 years later, when we walked to Austin from San Antonio in January of 2003, Dobie Mall kept us from freezing. I probably spent thousands of hours sitting in their food court looking out the second-story window onto the drag. When I die, if I become a ghost, I figured I'd haunt the first 2 floors of Dobie Mall. When the IT place opened, I was one of the first to apply. I never owned a computer before, but I somehow passed their efficiency test and they hired me full-time. We took calls from people deep in West Virginia. They usually wanted to know how to check their email or where the on button was located. I didn't know half as much about computers as my coworkers, so if I didn't know the answer to someone's question, I just let them handle it. If they were too busy, then I put people on hold and surf the web until they hung up. Sometimes I'd give callers crazy instructions and get the whole office laughing. By the time finals started, I stopped attending half of my classes. I was lucky some instructors let me turn in late work and do makeup assignments. I had to talk my way out of a couple failing grades, but I survived. And I survived and was due another financial aid check in January. I didn't have much hope of actually graduating and getting a degree in journalism, but I was proud to have survived one of the hardest times of my life. Chris and Summer didn't ask for money and encouraged me to save what I made. I couldn't have had better friends at the time, and I don't think I would have had the courage to keep going to UT without them. Summer had been going there for almost 3 years and had a better idea than anyone what I was going through. They're not all stuck-up frat boys and sorority girls, she told me. There's some really interesting people. You just have to look closer. You're just seeing what you see on the surface. She was right. I was so upset about how different I felt that I didn't keep an open mind. I turned it into a me against them thing, which led me to not take advantage of or even notice all the interesting people and opportunities that walked right in front of me every day. A week before Christmas, Michael called and said he got kicked out and was living in his car. It was freezing outside, so I told Chris and Summer about it, and they invited him to sleep in the corner of their living room. He got there an hour later, ate something, and went to sleep. Now there were 4 people and 3 cats living in a 1-bedroom apartment, but surprisingly, everyone got along. I slept on the couch, Chris and Summer slept in the bedroom, and Michael slept on a pile of dirty clothes that smelled like cat piss. Mornings were hectic with everyone getting dressed, using the bathroom, making breakfast, feeding the cats. Keanu! That's my cat. Summer and I walked to school early in the morning and went our separate ways when we got there. While we were in class, Chris and Michael smoked pot and watched PBS children's shows. The month off I had for Christmas gave me time to reflect. I reminded myself that I was still the same person whether I was a student at UT or picking up trash on the side of the freeway. I told myself to relax. I didn't have to be there. I could easily be doing the whole back to school thing for fun or just to see what college is actually like. I worked as much as I could during winter break. We got to make our own schedules, so I signed up to work on Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day. One reason was for holiday pay, but I also couldn't think of a better place to spend my time. It gets old being alone every year at home in front of the TV on Christmas. Looking at my cat over there because he's on the balcony edge, trying to catch birds. On Christmas Eve, I met with the Dobie Mall security guard, and he told me I was going to be by myself in the mall the whole night. I thought, are you guys crazy? But I played it off and acted like a responsible adult, agreeing with everything. It was hard to do because I was basically in shock that I was going to have the whole place to myself. Where some might have been sad or depressed being alone and working on Christmas Eve, I was ecstatic and in the best mood I've been in all year. Apparently, people in the backwoods of West Virginia don't have computer problems on Christmas because I didn't get a single call all night. I turned up the radio and propped open the office door so I could hear the phone if it rang. It didn't, so I spent the first couple hours sitting in the food court looking out my favorite window. It was a cold Austin night and I didn't see anyone on the street below. Christmas Eve is the only night of the year where there's no one on the drag. It was the best Christmas I had in years, dancing around my familiar mall. I could have easily been a drag rat that slipped inside an open window and found himself in one of the largest dorms in the United States. At that moment, I realized that even if all of UT didn't want me, if the whole city of Austin didn't care about me, and even if the entire world wished I hadn't been born, I was here and I wasn't going anywhere. For one night, I owned the mall. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people that had been there before, I wasn't allowed to let any of them inside. Even if Michael Dell knocked on the door wanting to get something out of his old dorm room, I couldn't let him in. I went behind the counter at Nikki's Pizzas and gave all my imaginary friends my best Italian accent while I pretended to toss dough in the air. When I got bored with that, I went to the candy store and looked in the windows, briefly concocting a plan to bend a coat hanger that'd be long enough to slip under the door to steal some sour straws. A little bit later, I vandalized the Army Forces recruiting station for almost convincing my twin brother Michael to fight in Iraq. By the end of the night, I was back in front of my favorite window, arranging a makeshift bed from random cushions I found throughout the mall. I got comfortable and looked out the dark Austin night, knowing how rare this experience was. I'd go back to the same mall and the same window many times before, but never like this, on Christmas. I looked out the window onto the drag. I wasn't celebrating Christmas, I was celebrating my resourcefulness, my originality, and my ability to take whatever's thrown at me with a big smile. Nothing could bring me down as long as I stayed positive and endured. It had been a rough few months, some of the hardest I have ever had, but I was alive, and I knew if I could get through my first semester at UT, I could get through anything. I lit my candle, took a hit of weed, and breathed a sigh of relief. When the clock hit midnight, the Jeff Buckley version of Hallelujah, Hallelujah, fittingly played on the radio in the background. So that was chapter 9 of the great book, Homeless College Student, also known as Gonzo Education. It's a story about my life. It's my first memoir. It starts when I drop out of high school and ends when I graduate from the University of Texas. So it's one of the top journalism schools. What I noticed about that chapter 9, describe Dobie Mall. Dobie Mall used to be the largest building in Austin, and it's not really a mall, it's actually a dormitory, but I have a lot of memories going back 20 years, yeah. since 1998 was the first time I went there, and it was like a real laid back place. I'd go there and I'd sit down a lot, and I don't know, like, it is cliche how they say, if I knew them what I knew now, but that is totally true. And I look at myself and like I was kind of lost. I came from a place with no parents and no love and no affection and like just a horrible father. And I was in the mall and like I was most comfortable like by myself, I guess. And so, I'd sit there and I'd sit on a chair and like this was before like smartphones, so like nobody was on the phone, but I would have like a book with me or something, and I'd like gather my thoughts and stuff like. And I do that like for years, even when I started going to UT and at ACC, because before I was at the University of Texas. I went to community college, obviously. You can't drop out of high school and then immediately go to the University of Texas, despite what a lot of University of Texas students think. But no, so what is the story of this book? I drop out of high school and then I get my GED, and then I work a lot of different newspaper jobs, and then I start off at community college. I make straight A's at community college. I'm an editor of the newspaper, the community college newspaper. Plus, I have all that previous newspaper experience, and what is my first choice, my only choice of major? Journalism. The University of Texas has one of the largest journalism schools, or one of the best journalism schools in the United States, the second-ranked journalism school. And they're one of only 10 universities that are highly accredited enough to give out bachelor's of journalism degrees, which is a really good degree to have. Most journalists and newscasters don't even have that. So it's an interesting thing when you think about it, and especially coming from where I came from. Literally, more people have walked on the moon than dropped out of high school and graduated from one of the top journalism schools. And that's the only thing I wanted to get my degree in. I wasn't going to get a degree in psychology or history or English or anything because I wanted to write this book. And so it's not really fitting if I got a degree in like foreign language or something, or sociology. I had to get a degree in journalism, nonfiction writing. So, and like I described in this chapter, a good period of the time, I was homeless as well. I'll always be totally grateful. It gives me chills to start for Chris and Summer. Like neither of them were Christian, but like that was so kind of them. Like just so kind-hearted. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask me. They knew I needed a friend. I had no friends, no family, and it was freezing outside. They let me in. They let me stay on the couch. When I read this now, I'm like, well, I was so scared. I had like a little phone there, and I was just scared that they would kick me out. And so I just like look at the calendar on my phone, and I was just like awkward there, and I'm just like, I know that they didn't like sports or anything. I unfortunately liked sports at that time, but I knew that they were in like to role playing games and other things, and I wasn't into that. And like, so we had differences and stuff, and so I would just always keep the TV on and stuff to try to keep people distracted. But when you look back at things, I really wish I wouldn't have done that, because like they were kind enough to let me stay there. They called me Tommy because I reminded them of somebody they knew named Tommy. I pray that they're okay, or I don't know if I pray, but I hope that they're okay and everything, because they were some really good people, Chris and Summer, and they're probably not together anymore, but I hope they're okay. And like what I regret is I regret watching football. Like they didn't want football. I would put it on like to like not have to talk to them or something. But I should have just like been more open and been more friendly with them. And as soon as I move out, I never talk to them again. That's so cold. If somebody had done that to me, I would think that they were a jerk. But once again, this was the first live stream from this channel. Once this channel starts building up and gets more and more subscribers, I'm getting like about 5-10 new subscribers a day. If you haven't already, click the thumbs up button, click the subscribe button, because this is going to be really lit, this channel. I'm going to be reading books, but I'm going to be doing live streams where I'm reading live, and you're also any book, lots of famous books too, books that you're reading for school, and then there'll be a live chat also going, so I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have on the book. It's a really genius idea that nobody's doing yet, so I'm going to be doing it. Other people may try to copy it, but you can't really. Very few people that are as smart as I am. So yeah, it's going to be a really great channel. There's going to be a nice background. There's going to be a chat going, so you can ask me questions, and I'm really looking forward to it.